Okay, perfect. Everyone's just trickling in, so we're going to give everyone some time, a couple minutes to enter into the webinar, get settled, get their focus hat on. But we're very excited. Courtney and I are very excited to present you this really interesting webinar today about employee engagement and the interconnection it has with inclusion. So just as we get everyone into the webinar, if you feel like it, we love to hear from you. I always say this, but we do love to hear from you. We love these to be as interactive as possible. So we'd love to hear where you are today and what time it is in your time zone. I always like to know where is everyone and what time it is. I am in Vancouver, BC, Canada, and it's 9:01 a.m. for me right now. Courtney, where are you?
I'm in Los Angeles, California, and it is also 9:01 a.m. for me right now.
Perfect. And we also have LaSalle. LaSalle, do you want to put in the chat where you are today? I think you're, oh, there you did. Awesome. What time is it, LaSalle, in Manchester right now?
It's 5 p.m. in Manchester, so bit of a difference.
Perfect. You're just ending your day, and Courtney and I are just starting ours.
Yeah. I can never get used to the time difference. It's so crazy.
It is wild, isn't it?
All right.
Wonderful. So we'll just, yeah, you want to get going, Court?
I think so.
Jimmy, so where are you? You're in Mississippi and it's 11. Oh, you're just about at lunch. Wonderful. Okay, so great. We'll get going now that everyone has gotten in and is settled. So I'll pass it off to Courtney to get us introduced.
Awesome. Thanks, Caitlin. So good morning, good afternoon, good day to everyone who's on the call. Like Caitlin mentioned, today we're going to get into how inclusion and engagement are interconnected and support each other. And so we're really excited to just jump right into this conversation. But before we do, a little bit of context about who we are. I am Courtney. I'm the product lead at Diversio, very intimately familiar with all of our data analytics and just focused on making our product even more better for all of the DEI professionals in the space. And I'm joined today with Caitlin.
Thanks, Courtney. And I'm our senior account executive, and I get the pleasure of introducing Diversio and the solutions that we have to DEI leads and HR leads around the world. So I'm really kind of bringing in that insight today as well, just information about Diversio, the solutions that we have, and how we look at engagement and inclusion.
Awesome. Thanks, Caitlin. So today we're going to get into a couple of things, specifically starting off with what is employee engagement, why is it important, and then diving into what is an inclusive culture, get us all on the same page, make sure we have the same understanding. And then we're going to talk about how our inclusion framework at Diversio supports employee engagement. And then tying it all together, we're going to get a first look at our new and improved platform that will show you exactly how Diversio clients interact with both inclusion and engagement. So, Caitlin, what is employee engagement and why does it matter?
Great question. So employee engagement has been around for some time. It was first coined by Boston University's William Cann in his 1990 paper, Psychological Conditions of Personal Engagement and Disengagement at Work. So in this paper, Cann describes how he observed people bringing themselves into and out of moments with regard to their work. He went on to propose that 3 psychological conditions would need to be present as the soil in which engagement might take root. So these were meaning, safety, which is psychological, and availability, which is emotional, physical, and psychological. In 2002, 4 researchers, Willem B. Schaffelli, Marissa Savilnova, Vincent Gonzalez Roma, and Arnold B. Baker, created a new instrument to measure the concept of engagement, which they published a paper titled The Measurement of Engagement and Burnout, a 2-sample confirmatory factor analytic approach. So this paper introduced 3 factors for positive psychology construct of engagement, which are vigor, dedication, and absorption. The survey instrument they created to measure these factors is called the Utrecht Work Engagement Scale, or UWES, and this has become the most commonly used scale in academic papers for measuring engagement. So of course, employee engagement is one of the most important indicators for gauging work satisfaction. Employees today want to be involved in their work and enthusiastic about the organization they work for. Despite this, employee engagement across the world is very low. So to give you a statistic here, according to Gallup data, the overall percentage of engaged workers during 2022 in the US is only 34%, and that's actually down from 39% in 2021. So employee engagement measures how employees feel about their organization. Based on their perceptions of their workplace, employees are categorized into 4 main groups, which is highly engaged, moderately, barely, or disengaged. Next slide. Employee engagement is often confused with or used interchangeably with similar concepts like employee inclusion, happiness, satisfaction, or well-being. But there are some clear differences among these concepts that are important to understand. So today we're going to dig into the differences between employee engagement and employee inclusion specifically, as that's our area of expertise. And we want to look at the correlations between the sub-factors of engagement and inclusion. So next slide. First, to understand engagement, let's look at what an engaged employee looks like. An engaged employee is someone who can relate to, feels represented by, and trusts their leadership, feels valued and supported, feels involved in the bigger picture, is appreciated as an individual, communicates openly and has a voice and is listened to, is proud of their work and the company they work for, and they see a future at that company. So it's clear to see why companies started to become interested in employee engagement in the 90s, and now it's common practice in most organizations to have some function of measuring engagement of their employees. But as this concept is new and ever evolving, just like us in our workplaces, we're continually iterating to find better ways to engage our employees. And today we'll explore how measuring inclusion can help you do just that. So Courtney, can you explain to us what an inclusive culture is?
Absolutely. Before we get into that, though, we'd love to give everyone an opportunity to share what they think an inclusive culture is. So we all have had a good level set on what engagement is, how it's different from inclusion, but feel free to throw in the chat right now if you have any ideas about what an inclusive culture is and what that looks like in your experience.
And we can ask LaSalle to get us started. LaSalle, can you give us an example of what to you an inclusive culture means and is? And then if anyone else wants to participate, we love to hear from you as well.
I think it's a culture that's completely open and transparent. So it's not necessarily getting everything perfect all the time. But all the employees and all the team feel comfortable to speak about their experiences and what they need to be different, and what they need to improve. So everyone's collectively working towards the same goal.
I love that. Love that definition.
Yeah, absolutely. She's touching on a very important concept of or component of inclusion that we'll get to in just a second. Yeah, embracing and celebrating our differences. It's not about making us the same. It's about honoring what makes us different.
Love that.
Awesome. All right. Well, if anyone else wants to share anything, feel free to put it in the chat, but we will go forward with Diversio's definition of what an inclusive culture looks like. So at Diversio, we've defined an inclusive culture to allow people to have these parameters that they can collect data, improve, and work on actively making this a better environment for their employees. So for us, an inclusive culture is one where an organization has diversity, equity, inclusion embedded throughout all of its practices and decision-making. It incorporates policies to ensure that all employees, including underrepresented groups, are safe, happy, and celebrated at work, with that safety part being key. Inclusive organizations are working to empower those underrepresented employees and level the playing field. And a culture of continuous learning and adapting is key, something we had a few people share as well. Like, you have to be open to being vulnerable in this space because it is constantly changing and it's hard work and it's emotional work. So the same way that we went over what an engaged employee looks like, we're going to talk about what an included employee looks like. Caitlin, what does an included employee look like?
Yeah, so I love kind of looking at the differences here, there's similarities, but there are key differences. So an included employee is someone who feels physical, psychological, and emotional safety at work. They're able to attend their personal care obligations and offered flexible and understanding working environment. They know they will receive fair, unbiased feedback from their management. They feel there's transparency and communication from leadership, and they have a voice and they are listened to. And they're able to advance their career and have adequate resourcing, accessibility, and networking opportunities to do just that.
Absolutely.
So next, we're going to look at our inclusion metrics. If you're not familiar with Diversio, I'm going to just give you an introduction to our inclusion framework right now and give you a little bit of a backstory on how we developed this framework. So much in the same way that employee engagement was developed, Diversio has an academic foundation. And so we defined a way to measure inclusion in organizations. And to do this, we partnered with a number of academic institutions and conducted large studies with thousands of employees in many different companies to define the best way to measure inclusion in an organization. What we found is that when we measured these 5 inclusion metrics that you see on your screen here, along with demographic groups in a company and specific sub-factors that back each metric, we can understand and measurably improve inclusion overall at the company. So we see an average of 6.2 points a year for increase in inclusion scores overall with our clients, which is really exciting. We actually see a very consistent improvement in inclusion. So through all of our inclusion, though all of our inclusion metrics are important, we do have a way to categorize priority that is demonstrated in this slide. This is what we call our inclusion house. So starting with workplace safety as our foundation. Then we have workplace flexibility, fair management, and inclusive culture as the walls of our house, and career development as our roof. It's important to look at inclusion this way because the purpose of understanding inclusion at your company is to understand that not everyone has the same access to inclusion, this same inclusion house. And we need to understand that access to address it appropriately. So Courtney's going to explain next how we add the layer of demographics to this in order to really understand who's accessing inclusion and who needs more support in terms of accessing inclusion in your organization.
Thanks, Caitlin. Yeah, so as Caitlin mentioned, we want to put a diversity lens on top of all of this inclusion work because we don't want our representation to be unfairly biased towards a more prevalent group in the company. And so the way that we do that at Diversio is by defining something called a dominant group. And this dominant group is a flexible label that applies specifically to the makeup of your organization. So first, when we have all of the data collected from an organization, we analyze it by looking at the characteristics across mind and body, which is anyone with a physical, cognitive, or mental condition, their race, ethnicity, gender, as well as sexual orientation. And then we're able to look at all of those characteristics at the executive or most senior level of the company. The characteristics in combination, which typically do consist of white heterosexual men without a disability at our organizations. That characteristic trait, all 4 of those together, becomes the dominant group. So those are the people who have the characteristics and the position of the most power at the company. That dominant group categorization then flows down to anyone at the organization who shares those 4 characteristics. So whether they're on the executive team or not, when we're understanding this data, those people who follow into those 4 groups count as that dominant group. And so the value of doing this is to really deeply understand how inclusive your environment is for the people who typically don't have a voice at your company. So even if that dominant group has different representation from the norm, the people who are not part of it are typically underrepresented in leadership positions, for example, manager positions at any level. Maybe they're not on all of the different committees whatever is happening at the organization, we wanted to give those people a voice because that's how you truly measure an inclusive environment. You need every single person's voice at the company to be heard. And so one of the things that we do from a little bit more of a technical perspective is that dominant groups score when it comes to inclusion only counts for 30% of the company's overall inclusion score. So the intention behind that is that we don't overshadow and skew the data in a more positive or negative direction based off of the experience of the majority of people, because inclusion is intended to look at the minority of people and make sure that everyone is being brought to the table to have an equal share, an equitable share actually in the company. And so one of the things that we do in our platform is assess the difference between the dominant and non-dominant groups at the company. And so the idea is to lower the delta, the difference between the dominant group score and the non-dominant group score. And the lower that difference is, the more inclusive of an environment you've created. And once those scores are a little bit closer together, you can work on elevating inclusion at the company for everyone. So it's important to add this demographic layer over inclusion. Otherwise, you're not really digging into the differences that people are experiencing at your company. And then this value allows you to really increase inclusion by focusing on either the specific demographic group or the specific area, like what Caitlin went through, workplace safety, fair management, inclusive culture, and really dive in on the aspect that's going to see you create the most positive change in your organization. So now we're going to get into how we connect the two. How does our inclusion framework support employee engagement?
Wonderful. And I love that so much. So I think the main difference between inclusion and employee engagement is inclusion is the environment and engagement is the result of that environment. If we can just make the most clear kind of distinction between these two things, that would be it. And so inclusion, pardon me, I just skipped ahead here. Yeah, so inclusion, now we're going to look at our framework and how it supports an employee engagement, specifically by looking at each of our sub-factors for inclusion and then how they are linked to engagement outcomes. So we're going to look first at our inclusion house and start at that foundation level, which is workplace safety. So we all are familiar with psychological safety as a term. If you're not, let us know. We can send you some information on this, but it's a well-established concept that can explain why employees may or may not be engaged. To the extent that employees feel that they can take interpersonal risks and express themselves in the workplace without fear of retaliation or repercussions. So that's that openness, that open culture that we were talking about. So employees with high levels of psychological safety tend to speak up, they share their opinions, and they bring their whole selves to work. Those with low levels of psychological safety tend to feel the need to defend their true selves, and they may keep their opinions to themselves completely, even if that has negative repercussions for the organization. When people feel safe at work, they don't need to spend as much of their time and energy focusing on themselves, and they can actually move into a team first mindset. So if you can imagine an engaged employee, they have that mindset, they have that team first mentality. They're not feeling like they need to defend themselves or spend a lot of energy in their day-to-day just protecting their identity. So workplace safety factors such as discrimination, toxic leadership, lack of recourse, retaliation, and harassment can have significant consequences on employee engagement. And so we're going to go into each of these and just look at these sub-factors. So discrimination has a correlating engagement sub-factor of decreased job satisfaction. Employees facing discrimination may experience decreased job satisfaction as they feel undervalued and unfairly treated. Being subject to discriminatory practices can lead to feelings of frustration and disengagement, and overall impact the employee's happiness and commitment to their roles. The next one would be toxic leadership, and the correlating engagement sub-factor is low trust and disengagement. So of course, toxic leadership erodes trust within the organization, leads to disengagement among employees who feel supported and undervalued. And then the lack of trust in leadership can hinder collaboration and communication, which reduces employee motivation and commitment again to that organization, which is a key engagement factor. Lack of recourse is the next factor we'll look at, and the correlating subfactor is reduced sense of safety. So the lack of recourse creates a sense of uncertainty and vulnerability among employees. They feel they're hesitant to speak up about workplace problems or report instances of misconduct, and they fear negative repercussions of not being taken seriously. So this reduces the sense of safety and contributes to a tense and anxious work environment, and it overall impacts employees' engagement and willingness to fully invest in their roles. The next one we're going to look at is retaliation. So the correlating engagement subfactor to retaliation is fear and reduced communication. So of course, the fear of retaliation creates a stifling work environment where employees become hesitant to express their opinions or raise important issues. They may avoid providing feedback or share innovative ideas to protect themselves from potential repercussions. This fear and reduced communication hinder open dialogue and collaboration, leading to a lack of constructive feedback and decreased team cohesion. So the overall atmosphere of apprehension and mistrust negatively impacts the employees' engagement, of course. They feel restricted in their ability to contribute fully to the organization's success. So the last inclusion factor here we're going to look at is harassment, with a correlating engagement subfactor of increased stress and decreased productivity. So harassment creates a hostile work environment. Of course, we all know this. It leads to increased stress and anxiety for employees that are subjected to mistreatment and microaggressions. And the emotional strain negatively impacts their overall well-being and work performance. As a result of this distress can cause employees may struggle to focus on their tasks at hand. And of course, this decreases their productivity. So in a toxic atmosphere created by harassment, this hinders, of course, collaboration, teamwork, and employees will eventually just withdraw from their work. Overall, the impact of harassment on employees and engagement can have a significant result, and it decreases job satisfaction and, of course, in turn, increases attrition overall in the organization. Employees will leave the organization for a more healthy environment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. Court, do you want to take the next one? Oh, actually, we have a real life example. We are going to talk about each of these in a real world setting or context, just to kind of bring this home into what this can look like. So we're going to imagine an employee named Alex, and they're experiencing discrimination at work based on their gender identity. They are transgender and feel subtle acts of discrimination, such as being excluded from team events, receiving derogatory comments, and not being considered for promotions despite their qualifications and performance. So Alex's engagement at work is negatively affected, of course. They feel demotivated and disconnected from their colleagues and their company's mission. And the constant stress and anxiety from facing discrimination can impact their overall job satisfaction, leading to decreased productivity and lack of enthusiasm in their role. Moreover, the discrimination might create a hostile work environment for Alex, making them hesitant to speak up or share their opinions openly. So here how it will actually ripple out and affect the team morale. So colleagues who witness discrimination towards Alex may feel demoralized and disheartened by the unfair treatment, and it can actually create a sense of helplessness and frustration within the team environment, affecting their motivation and the team spirit. And that lower trust in the organization then creates and erodes the trust and commitment to inclusivity and fairness. And colleagues may question the company values and wonder if they too could be subject to discrimination in the future. It also has an impact on the team dynamics. So it'll strain the relationships among team members and may create division and tension affecting collaboration and teamwork within the group. Of course, it's divisive, right? And then colleagues may fear speaking up. So they may be reluctant to voice their concerns about discrimination or other issues of fear of retaliation or being ostracized. This fear can hinder open communication and constructive feedback with the team, as well as it will eventually decrease productivity. It will increase higher turnover. And then in summary, the discrimination experienced by one employee can create a chain reaction of negative consequences that affect the overall well-being and performance of all of the colleagues in the workplace, or at least those that are closest to the situation.
Yeah, amazing. So I want to pause here and really let that sink in a little bit. And we've spent a lot of time on this workplace safety factor. We're not going to spend as much time on the rest of them because this is the foundation. There is an incredible intention as to why workplace safety is the foundation of the house, the first need that you have to have met, the most important of our 5 KPIs. And that's because you can't move on and create any sort of inclusive environment for folks if they're feeling unsafe at work. And you can't even do it for the people who are around the person feeling unsafe at work. And as Caitlin mentioned, often, even if you're not the target of harassment, discrimination, or any of the factors that have gone into this workplace safety, just by being in proximity to that person, you still will report higher instances and feeling like all of these things are happening, even if they're not happening to you.
And at Court, I love that. And I want to kind of bring in the question that we ask to understand workplace safety, because I think the way we ask this is so key. We ask, do you feel your workplace is free from harassment, physical, mental, and psychological? And the way we ask this question is not, do you experience harassment? We really want to get a sense of all employees' experience, whether that's witnessing harassment or receiving harassment in certain ways in an organization, so that they have the opportunity to share insights and information that aren't only pertinent to their experience of the organization, but maybe something that they also have witnessed.
Exactly. And so with that really strong foundation, with those workplace safety feelings really taken into consideration, brought up, making sure everyone's on that playing field where we can start working on the other aspects, we'll move into the next 3 metrics that they have a similar level of importance. So all of these are those foundational, post-foundational, they're the walls of the house. I really like that analogy. So next we have fair management. Fair management, workplace safety, and inclusive culture are the metrics I'm speaking of. They are not different in importance. We're just going to go through them one at a time. So fair management is defining whether or not all employees are receiving fair and objective feedback on their performance. So it's the idea where you're treating employees and team members impartially and equitably. So it involves objectively applying workplace policies and procedures, making decisions based off solely on merit and performance, and ensuring equal opportunities for growth and development. So when we focus on fair management, we're creating a positive work environment where all individuals at the company are respected, appreciated, and provided with the support that they need to thrive. This is important when we layer on that demographic level here, because you're really able to take a look at, okay, do we have these policies in place to be fair managers? And is one group specifically getting treated differently? And if you're observing that trend with that intersectional lens, you can really focus your fair management efforts, as opposed to just looking at the company as a whole. You might not necessarily see that inequity. So to look at the sub-factors of fair management, we're taking a look at the absence of nepotism and favoritism. So you want to address not creating an environment that has nepotism and favoritism. So what's happening here is that correlates with equal opportunities in engagement. When you don't have nepotism and favoritism, all employees have an equal chance to show their skills and capabilities. And that really allows them to be more engaged in the work that they're doing. They have the opportunity to show up. If we move to employee recognition, we're creating a correlating engagement subfactor of motivation and morale. So when you recognize people for the work that they're doing and you value their contributions, you're creating an employee who wants to continue performing at that level and continue getting recognized for the work that they're doing. Next, moving into pay and performance equity, this is correlated with incentive for excellence. So when people are getting equitable pay and performance evaluations solely based on what they have brought to the work environment and not who they are, you're going to see that their efforts being rewarded fairly compared to other people is, again, creating that engaged employee who's going to continue to work hard because their performance is being recognized. Next, we move into the transparency of expectations, which is something that we brought up at the very beginning of a key component of inclusive culture, that transparency. So this correlates from an engagement perspective to clarity of purpose. So when you're transparently communicating as an organization, you're giving employees clarity and clear direction about how they can achieve the elements in their role that overall support the company's goals. So instead of, having somebody come and think, okay, you try all of these different things and your manager doesn't tell you how any of them relate to each other or how any of them have to do with, the goals that you have as a department for that quarter, you're not really going to be engaged in that work. You don't know what's going on. You don't understand why you're doing something. But when you understand why you're an engaged employee, because you can see how your work contributes to the overall success and it has meaning for you. The next part here is unbiased management, and this leads again to trust and confidence, which is something that you're going to see throughout all of these inclusion metrics because that trust is still such an important layer. So that unbiased management builds trust and confidence among employees and their leaders. And so when employees are trusting that decisions are being made fairly, they're more likely to be engaged and feel secure. The last factor here is clear communication, and this helps with understanding expectations and providing clarity of purpose. So you have those understanding of your roles, responsibilities, the organization's vision on a broad scale, and you know what is expected of you each and every day that you come to work. When you have all of these things, you have a stronger sense of purpose and, again, engagement in your company. So next, we're going to take a look at a real life example with Amy and John. So Amy and John are working in the same department at company ABC, and they have similar roles, responsibilities, and experience. Over time, it's evident that Amy is outperforming John consistently at a higher level. She's exceeding targets and delivering exceptional results. John's performance is satisfactory. He's a good employee, but not as outstanding as Amy. Despite this superior performance, however, she receives the same salary increase and bonus as John during their performance review. The company's pay structure does not differentiate for pay based on individual performance, leading to pay and performance equity issues. So what does this do? How does this create a non-inclusive and an unengaged environment? So because there's no differentiation in pay based on performance, Amy's incentive is dampened. Even though she consistently goes above and beyond in her work, there's no financial reward or recognition for her exceptional efforts. This lack of recognition creates a sense of unfairness, and Amy feels that her hard work goes unnoticed or unappreciated, or maybe both. As a result of this, Amy's motivation to excel in her role is going to diminish. She might start questioning the value of putting in extra effort when there's no tangible reward or recognition for doing so. In this case, there's not even a verbal recognition. There's no acknowledgement of what Amy is doing and how her work is contributing to the team. Over time, her enthusiasm and willingness is going to wane, and it's going to impact her incentive for excellence. John, on the other hand, who's getting the same salary increase and bonus despite his average performance, isn't going to feel a drive to improve. He's not creating that link between his effort and financial rewards, which can lead to a lack of initiative to push beyond his comfort zone and strive for excellence. So we're typically used to the Amy side of things, where somebody who's working really hard and not seeing any reward, whether it's verbal, title, promotion, incentive, bonus, what have you, and they're going to pull back and be less engaged, less productive of a worker. But this also creates the opposite effect, where as employers, you always want the people that work for you to be creative, productive, bring, their full intelligence to the workplace. And John is seeing, I'm getting rewarded just as much as this woman who's working twice as hard as me. I'm not going to work any harder. So incentives can be misaligned in both a positive or a negative way, and it can create a negative effect on both sides of that misalignment. And next, we're going to get into workplace flexibility.
Thank you, Court. What a great example. And I'm sure we've all either been familiar with that kind of example or seen something similar in our organizations. So just really clearly identifying how important it is to look at individuals and look at trends in your organization. So now we're going to talk about workplace flexibility, such a key factor. And of course, we want to know whether the employees that you have in your organization have the support needed to manage their home care obligations. And so this really helps organizations retain and attract diverse talent when they have very good workplace flexibility policies. And so what we're going to look at here are the sub-factors to workplace flexibility and how they correlate to employee engagement. The first is mental health support, and the employee engagement sub-factor would be talent attraction. So obviously, if you offer robust mental health support programs, it signals the company's commitment to its employees that it cares about their well-being. Also, that it cares about the culture, it cares about their home lives. So prospective employees, especially those who prioritize work-life balance and employee wellness, are more drawn to organizations that have very good values around mental health support. The next one is paid time off. So the correlating engagement sub-factor is stress reduction. We all know when we take a vacation, we come back to work recharged, we feel really invigorated, we've had time to take a moment into our own lives. So it allows employees to take this much needed break and recharge, which helps reduce the stress overall and prevent burnout. And organizations that ensure their employees take their paid time off, that's a very key, because it can become a company culture to kind of not take your paid time off, maybe take the bonus at the end of the year, which means that you're not really taking that time to recharge. So it's a very good practice for organizations to also just ensure their employees are actually taking that use of the paid time off. And so what we see is there's a better balance overall with home work-life balance, as well as employees are more likely to feel motivated and engaged and committed to their roles within the organization. Parental leave is ultimately very important for organizations to incorporate into their practices. This is for both parents, both male and female, or any identifying parents that they have in their organization. It provides employees with the autonomy and flexibility to manage their work-life balance during that crucial time of welcoming a new child into their family. When employees have the option to take parental leave, they feel empowered to make choices that align with their personal needs and responsibilities. This autonomy allows them to focus on their family commitments without the added stress of juggling work demands. And as a result, employees experience a sense of trust and appreciation for the company, leading to the higher levels of engagement and loyalty. The ability of parental leave fosters a supportive and inclusive work environment, which enhances their employees' overall well-being and job satisfaction, and even for some employees, the ability to stay at work. Next, we're going to look at remote work and the correlated engagement sub-factor, which is work-life balance. So remote work provides employees with the flexibility to balance their work and personal lives more effectively. With the ability to work from home or from other remote work locations, employees can better manage their daily schedules, reducing commuting time, spending more time with their families. This improved work-life balance leads to higher levels of job satisfaction as employees feel more in control of their time and can create a harmonious integration of their personal and professional responsibilities. So clearly, these are very key factors to have in place in your workplace practices and policies. So now we're going to look at an example of this, a real life example. So we're going to meet Emily, who's a new mother who works from a company without a sufficient parental leave policy and remote working options. So after giving birth, Emily finds herself facing a challenging situation. Her company only offers a minimal amount of unpaid maternity leave, which puts her in a difficult financial position as she needs time off to care for her newborn. Without adequate parental leave, she is forced to return to work earlier than she would like, leaving her feeling overwhelmed and anxious about balancing work and caring for her new baby. The lack of support and flexibility from her employer can cause additional stress, affecting her overall well-being and ability to perform at her best in both her personal and professional life. And her job does not provide remote working options, which makes it challenging for her to be there during critical moments for emergencies, and the lack of flexibility means she struggles to find alternative childcare arrangements, causing constant worry and emotional strain. So as a result, Emily's stressed and exhausted, and it's really impacting her engagement, of course, at her role. and it's also impacting her productivity. So she's experiencing feelings of guilt for not being able to spend enough time with her baby, leading to decreased job satisfaction and a growing sense of burnout. In this example, the absence of parental leave policy and remote working options creates a significant difficulty for Emily as a new working parent. And her struggles highlight the importance of such policies in supporting employees during life-changing events and promoting a healthier work-life balance. So Courtney will take on our next inclusion metric, and it's going to be inclusive culture.
Thanks, Caitlin. All right, so inclusive culture is where we measure whether or not employees feel like they're part of a team, whether or not they can meaningfully contribute alongside their peers. So we measure this by looking at level team building, empathy building, employee engagement, adequate resourcing, and inclusive leadership. And so what you're seeing here is that employee engagement is a component of measuring inclusive culture quite directly. So when we look at collaborative teamwork, what we're correlating to here is team cohesion. So it fosters a sense of belonging and camaraderie among team members, and they feel like employees feel like they're part of a supportive and cohesive team. They're engaged and motivated to collaborate effectively, and they're achieving their goals. When we have adequate resourcing, we're providing employees with the tools, resources, and support they need to excel in their roles. And so when these employees feel empowered with the right resources, they're more likely to be engaged and confident. So that leads to employee empowerment. Respect and compassion is our next one here. We're looking at how that leads to trust and psychological safety. Again, a repeated theme. And so what we're seeing is a workplace valuing respect and compassion. It's creating that trust and psychological safety among employees. When people are feeling respected and supported, they're more willing to speak out, take risks, share their opinion, and contribute actively. Next, we look at inclusive leadership, and that correlates to employee involvement. So inclusive leaders are ones who actively involve employees in the decision-making process, and they're valuing their input. It doesn't necessarily mean they're doing what their employee is suggesting, but they're actively listening and engaging in respecting that employee has come up and shared their opinion. So it enhances that, again, engagement and commitment to the vision and mission of the organization. And then the last, we skipped over it here, employee engagement, and that leads to employee engagement. So if you're creating an environment where folks are feeling engaged, their voices are heard, they are hitting all of those other factors that came before, workplace safety, fair management, and flexibility, you're more likely to have an employee who shows up, brings their full self, and is actively trying to better the organization. So let's take a look again at another example here with Aisha, who's a marketing specialist at a growing startup. So the company is expanding its client base, taking on more projects, and the workload for the marketing team is increasing. If any of you are calling in from working at a startup right now or have worked at one in the past, you definitely understand this struggle. The company has not allocated sufficient resources to support the team's growing responsibilities. So what's happening to our marketing team and Aisha specifically? She's feeling that the workload is overwhelming and there's limited resources. The team is going to struggle to meet deadlines and manage all of these projects, and she's feeling stressed and frustrated. This is going to reduce productivity, creativity, and innovation, leading to lower job satisfaction and an unsupported and undervalued feeling. They're going to start questioning their role within the organization, and that's going to, again, lead to decreased job satisfaction and reduced motivation to do a good job. So what's important here is that we address the issue that's going on. We can understand as managers, as leaders in a team, that there's not always an easy solution, but no one is coming to Aisha, no one's coming to the marketing team and saying, we see you, we know that you need support. We're going to work on prioritizing our resources and making sure the flow of responsibility so that stress isn't landing on her as an employee. If they don't address this issue in the marketing team for these additional workload, they're going to see an increased risk of burnout. So Aisha is dealing with all of the stress and frustration. She's not hearing anything from management, and she has no idea what's going on. So she feels like there's no resources, there's no support, and she doesn't want to be engaged, present, and satisfied in her work anymore. She feels very alone. All right, and so next we're going to get into career development, the roof, the foundation, the hardest one for a lot of folks in this space to actually achieve successfully. Let's talk about why it's so important.
Yeah, thank you, Court. And as we kind of build our inclusion house, obviously we need a roof to that. And that's kind of our North Star, our goal. We want to be able to develop the careers of all of our employees, no matter the, economic situation. There's lots of great ways to develop your employees and their careers. And really it's about being engaged with your employees. And just thinking of the last example with Aisha, if the organization had that transparent leadership functioning well, maybe the leaders would engage her in the conversations around budget and help her with the decision-making factors around priorities of resources. And it's similar with career development. We can have really great policies and practices in place in our organization, but if your employees aren't aware of them and not accessing them at the same rate, then you're going to have some employees that feel like they're being underdeveloped. And so when we look at inclusion or our inclusion metric career development and the sub-factors, we're going to first start with mentorship and sponsorship, and it's correlating employee engagement sub-factor, which is access and relationships. So mentorship and sponsorship provide employees with access to experienced individuals and valuable relationships within the organization. When employees have access to mentors and sponsors, they gain insight, support, and connections that contribute to their professional growth, as well as their overall engagement and commitment to the organization. Employees with either a mentor or sponsor are more than twice as likely as those without to strongly agree that their organization provides a clear plan for their career development. Not only do mentors and sponsors help employees chart a path to their future, but it also helps ensure employees are equipped to reach their goals. For example, an employee with mentor, I already said that, they're twice as likely to agree that they have had opportunities to learn and grow in their work in the last year. So they're certainly more engaged. They're more likely to say that they have opportunity, and also they're developing their skill set. So not surprisingly, employees with this kind of support for growth and development at work are more positive in terms of employee experience, and they're twice as likely to be engaged and 98% more likely to strongly agree that they would recommend their organization as a great place to work. The sources Gallup for that, which is fantastic. They're bringing other great employees into the workplace because they're having such a positive experience. The next factor is career development itself, and it's so critical for all employees long term and for the success of their organization. The correlating sub-factor for engagement is growth opportunities. So career development programs offer employees opportunities to enhance their skills, acquire new knowledge, and advance in their careers. When employees have access to meaningful growth opportunities, they're more engaged and they can see a clear path for their professional development within the organization. The next factor we're going to look at here is networking opportunities, which is the sub-factor of connection and collaboration. So networking opportunities allow employees to connect with their colleagues and professionals, fostering collaboration and camaraderie. When employees have the chance to build valuable relationships outside of their direct cohort of colleagues, they become more engaged and are invested in the organization's success and able to develop their careers. Networking opportunities allow employees to connect with colleagues and professionals outside of their typical sphere of influence, and it also helps with organization communication and cross-functional relationships, which can kind of build networks within an organization that actually help organizations become more efficient as well. The next we're going to look at is adequate training, and the sub-factor for that would be skill enhancement. So adequate training equips employees with the necessary skills and knowledge to excel in their roles. And when employees receive relevant and comprehensive training, they feel more confident in their abilities, leading to increased engagement and job satisfaction. So let's look at an example of these. We have here seeing it in action. Arjun joined Bootstrap, a technology startup, and was excited about his opportunity to work on cutting edge projects. However, he quickly noticed that the company lacks a structured training program for new employees. Without proper training, his skills for development suffered, leading to decreased productivity and frustration. Feeling unsupported, Arjun started exploring other job opportunities, and he wasn't alone, as other new starts and existing employees felt similarly, which increased turnover at the startup. And in effect, it actually affected Bootstrap's reputation as a brand due to the lack of training and support, as this oftentimes impacted their customers, which caused new customers to churn and not renew. So as you can see, this is ultimately very important for the overall success of the organization.
Yeah, and it's important not just in that new hire role, but also, as you can see, when people are moving from level to level, perhaps to a different department, they need that support as well to learn and master the responsibilities of their job.
Exactly. And that's why having kind of skill set surveys or being able to assess your employees' knowledge and where they have gaps also links back to that career development factor. So when you have a plan of skill development for each employee in the areas that would support them in advancing their careers, as you can see, this will help the organization, but it'll also help that employee track their advancement kind of path that they have within the organization.
Mhm. And again, that can tie into transparency, as if they know the plan, they're more excited about the plan and they're more committed to the work.
Exactly, which also then ties back to their performance. So it's all very intimately connected. In summary, what we want to kind of just summarize here, inclusion and employee engagement are, just like we've said, intimately connected. And ultimately, organizations will have a hard time increasing employee engagement without first looking at the inclusion and addressing inclusion overall for all of the different groups and different employees in the organization. It's not a one size fits all. This is when that equity piece comes in. Each employee group in your organization is going to need different approaches to help increase engagement. And so we can see, their overall engagement rates are low worldwide. And companies are challenged each year with addressing these low engagement scores. So we're going to take a look right now at the Diversio platform just in the last couple minutes we have together. We're actually going to look at how we look at inclusion overall in your organization and layer on the piece of engagement. So Courtney's going to share her screen. We're going to pop into our, our demo environment here so we can just take a look at the data within Diversio and how we display this data and also how it interplays in terms of inclusion and employee engagement when you layer on the demographic viewpoint of different groups within your organization. And it's very exciting. We've just launched these new features within Diversio last week, right, Courtney? So the team's been working really hard. So what you're going to see here is a very new looking Diversio too.
So we're, due to time, just going to pop into our inclusion section here. And what you're seeing at that first glance is all of the things that we've talked about combined together. So you're seeing this dominant group that we talked about before, and then all of the non-dominant race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, and disability groups here. You're seeing the scores for all of the different KPIs that we went through, how somebody is feeling compared to the dominant group, as well as the benchmark industry that they're in. But the key to tying this all together is that we're viewing both our KPIs for inclusion, as well as any engagement question that the organization wants to ask, all in one place. You additionally will have the option to view just one at a time, just inclusion or just engagement. But the strongest value here is to look at these scores and compare them to each other. We're seeing that people are in the dominant group are feeling like they have more optimal opportunities, and that they're connecting to the meaningful mission of the organization, that they feel that there's a meaningful mission at the organization. But when you look a little further down, you're seeing that people in that non-dominant race and ethnicity group or non-dominant gender group are not feeling as strongly that they have those optimal opportunities to connect, to grow their career, and to really further their development at the company. And what's very helpful about this view is you can directly compare those scores to career development, and you see a similar trend as well as lower scores, and understand that you have to focus your attention on not just creating policies for people to be developed in their career, but also making sure that they're aware that those policies exist, something that Caitlin had touched on a little bit earlier.
Wonderful. So we want to make sure that we have time to answer any questions that we have from the audience just before we wrap the call. And we've got 5 minutes left. So if there's any questions that have come up for anyone during the session today, we'd love to hear from you. You can put them in the chat and we'll read them out so you don't, or you can ask them in the Q&A. And so 2 ways to ask questions. We certainly want to give you an opportunity to ask any questions or clarifications that came up today. And again, thank you for spending the time with us. We certainly appreciate it. And we hope that you found this information helpful and a little bit useful and a new way or a different approach to look at engagement and inclusion and how they're interconnected. And Lascelles, since we've got you on the call, Lascelles, do you have any questions that came up for you while we were on the webinar today, or any kind of information that stood out to you?
I think it might be helpful if we can give a couple of examples of the bespoke questions that people might ask that directly relates to engagement.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's lots of different ways, of course, that organizations look at engagement. One of the ways that we like to look at it is at the program or policy level. So our system will generate recommendations. For example, it may generate a recommendation around career development for racial and ethnic groups in your organization as their KPI or score is lower than others in the organization. You can set a KPI or goal to increase that, and then the system will generate programs and recommendations such as mentorship, sponsorship programs, et cetera, et cetera. One of the ways we like to look at these engagement factors is by actually asking employees in the organization, have you accessed your career development planning session with your manager this past quarter? That's a really good way to see in the organization who's accessing the programs and policies that you're deploying and whether there are some gaps in terms of access there, so you can become much more targeted with A, where you're deploying these types of programs and policies based on low scores, and B, whether those individuals are accessing them or aware of the program or policy. Another great way to do that is if you do, anti-harassment campaign throughout the organization, you can ask employees specifically whether that had made them feel more safe at work and kind of narrow in on the different policies that you're asking.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a question here from Marissa. It's a great question. It's a tough question. How do you navigate inclusion and engagement when the dominant group in your company is representative, but their practice and ideals align elsewhere? And her example is women are running the company, they're at that executive level, but the company and team are emphasizing traditional businessman and stereotypes for women.
Yeah, wow. Marissa, what a great question. There's a lot to unpack here with this question. And I think overall, what we're working to do with surveys, if you're able to get surveys and systems like Diversio in your organization, the data is going to share a storyline. And so the storyline you want to share in your organization is that there's probably different opinions about what would be a healthy work environment than just what the dominant group's opinion is. And the idea is that we really want to take a look at all of those kind of beliefs and values and practices in the organization and kind of define the best path forward for the company. And so I think that, obviously we all work in a world where it's kind of a traditional business and the stereotypes are embedded. We're social creatures, but that awareness piece is really what I would boil down this work to. Each of us does need to become aware of our own beliefs and values and the way that we think in order to drive this forward. It really does actually come down to each person's ability to become aware of themselves. And so you can start to do really neat training sessions and engagement sessions that help with that dialogue. Courtney, do you have any additions to that?
I do, yes. So one of the things, we didn't have time to go through a full demonstration of the analytic capabilities of our platform. But one of the things that happens is, even though you've grouped people by their representation, we have two things here you could look at. One, intersectional representation. So you could still hone in on the individual group that you want to look at, regardless of whether or not they're a dominant group, and see what their experience is. But the secondary part of it is, when you're analyzing this data, it's still going to expose that these stereotypes exist in the company. So perhaps you have a situation where the dominant group is feeling not good and their scores are lower than maybe the gender non-dominant group. You can still recognize patterns. We just went through perhaps what a more typical experience is at a company. But that will all still be present in the data. That's the value of asking people these questions in this manner. Are you experiencing this? Do you feel that you have these resources? And then being able to look not only at a group's response, but individual responses. And you can find where these attitudes permeate throughout the company, and actively work towards setting goals, looking at those recommendations and programs to up level everyone, not necessarily just the people who are in a dominant group or a non-dominant group.
Really great question.
Awesome.
Now we are about 1 minute past the top of the hour. So we don't want to keep you too long, but we do appreciate you staying until the end, and we will put our emails in the chat. If you have any questions that kind of were not addressed today, please do reach out. Also, if you want to see or have a, one sec, just typing to, yeah. Okay, so I'm just putting my email in the chat there. Feel free to reach out if you have questions we didn't address today, or you want to take a look at the complete demo of the platform and kind of dig into exactly like Courtney just mentioned, intersectionality tabs. We also have ability to look at free text and do analysis on that. So we have lots of ways to address these questions that you have coming up, and we're always happy to sit one-on-one with you and have a deep conversation about what's happening specifically in your organization.
Thanks everyone for joining, and wishing you a wonderful rest of your Tuesday, whatever time it might be for you.
Yes, enjoy yourself. Thank you so much.